attracted a number of veterans of the fading hippie counterculture.
Most of the members had been involved in other religious endeavors. Est, transcendental meditation, tarot cards, astrology. They were religious seekers for the most part.
In order to keep the business going, members sold blood at blood banks and asked for contributions from Christian bookstores. Some wealthy members gave their trust funds to the group. One of the early recruits was 19-year-old David Moore, to the utter amazement of his mother, Nancy Brown.
When David came to say goodbye, I was observing him very closely to see if he showed any signs of being, you know, a little off balance or being, you know, kind of a little wild-eyed or not making sense. But he seemed very calm, and he told me that this was something that spoke to him in a way that nothing that he had come across before had.
Applewhite and Nettles hated the attention of reporters, whom they believed asked annoying questions about Applewhite's past and the cult's financial situation. In 1976, the group went underground, living on campgrounds in so-called good energy states like Colorado, California, and Arizona.
So we isolated ourselves in this small group of 60 or 70 people, and we didn't have contact with our families. We were isolated into a circumstance where we could then focus on our change, and there was a continual emphasis on the urgency that we make our changeover quickly, because we wanted to be ready when they came.
One woman said to us that she when she bought toothpaste, she'd always buy a small tube because she'd expect to be leaving shortly. But then she said wistfully once, well, I'm always buying another tube.
As they anxiously awaited their exit, the group struggled to be like angels, denying their sexuality as well as their individuality.
Marshall Applewhite was promiscuous in his early life, and he saw sexuality as bad, giving him hard time. So he had to find a way to reckon with this.
Applewhite tried to exert strict control over the members of the group. At the same time, Nancy Brown began to publish a newsletter, creating a network for the shunned families.
One of the group members visited his mother, who was in the network, and saw this newsletter, and either took this newsletter with them or at least told T and Doe and the group about it. Well, apparently they were really startled and not pleasantly pleased.
They looked at her as kind of like a meddler, somebody that was just making trouble. And the way Marshall Applewhite thought was she was an agent of the lower forces. And it's kind of humorous looking back at it now, but at the time it was like a very serious thing, because there was this feeling that we'd get from Marshall Applewhite that somebody was out to get us. You know, somebody was going to take us down, take us off track, not allow us to complete our mission.
Sensing the newsletter might encourage parents to come after their children, Applewhite and Nettles reluctantly allowed members to contact their families. It was carefully controlled. Nancy Brown heard from her son David Moore through messages left on her answering machine.
Hello, this is your son David. If you want to know how you can help these parents who want to hear from someone on the trip, if you would print in your newsletter the names of those parents who will promise not to kidnap their family members or keep them from doing what they want to do, I'll promise you that most of these parents will hear from their loved ones pretty quickly. And I don't want you to worry about me, because there's really nothing to worry about.
By the early 80s, cracks were beginning to appear in the walls of the cult, which was now called Heaven's Gate. Many longtime members felt confused and quit. Terry Nettles started to sense her mother's doubts in her letters.
The letter in '82 that I got from my mom gave me the impression that I felt like she wanted out, or that she no longer believed it. It was something to the effect of, you know, be sure and conform to society, follow all the rules. And I thought, why is she saying these things? This isn't what she would have said to me a few years ago.
In 1984, Bonnie Lou Nettles was diagnosed with brain cancer. Admitted into a hospital under an assumed name, she died alone in her native state of Texas. Applewhite never informed Bonnie's children of her illness or death until several months later.
She was only a few hours away from me, so nobody even bothered to call me to tell me that my mom was dying so that I could be there with her. Nothing. My entire insides felt like it had been ripped out, and I spent many nights waking up the next day with my pillows soaking wet because I would just cry through the night.
Though Marshall Applewhite carried on without his beloved Bonnie Nettles, Doe, as he was called, was shaken by T's death.
It put not just Doe to the test, but it put all of us to the test of our commitment to the next level. Do we think this is real, or do we think this is just a con game?
How could a messenger of God die and her body remain on Earth? Marshall Applewhite had to quickly revise his doctrine.
He or they needed to kind of account for what happened to her. They contemplated the idea that one could achieve this spiritual transcendence through some other means than just physically going there in UFOs, that suicide was an option.
At her work, because it's not the one that the old influences or the old vehicles, impulses would respond to. So frequently this is what we do.
To maintain his role as the supreme and all-knowing leader, Applewhite enforced strict regulations that would further squelch free choice.
Regimentation of daily life, measuring of food, rigid rules when they went out to the external world to work, not to interact with people. It was all to become more and more focused as if they were on a spacecraft leaving, and if you were out in the outer world, you were out of craft. If you were in the house doing routines, that was in craft.
Applewhite began to question the obedience of his members. In the past, he had distanced himself from other men in the group to avoid his homosexual urges. Now, he asked the men to join him in castration.
Marshall Applewhite was talking about how far would you go in order to attain your mission. And so he evidently was entertaining castrating himself, getting rid of the human need to reproduce, or that hormonal impulse to be attracted to the opposite sex, or to be attracted to any sex. I started going, whoa, I don't know, I can't really go for this.
Michael Conyers did not undergo the procedure, but Applewhite and 6 other men in the cult flew to Mexico City and were surgically castrated. In the early 90s, Marshall Applewhite used the internet to spread his gospel to the outside world. He began designing personal websites, calling the company a higher source. Eventually, they were earning nearly $400,000 a year. With this income, they recruited new members by placing a full-page ad in USA Today and other newspapers.
Doe got instruction to relate to the world again and go out and collect any of the so-called second wave, or anyone who was ready